This video provides insights into the research process, more precisely into the individual elements of the research process, as well as into the ideal typical course of the research project. Here you can see some schematic representations of the research process, how the research process typically flows. For example, in the figure on the right, you can see that the research process typically begins with the selection of a topic. After that, different information is collected, on the one hand background information, on the other hand specific information based on academic literature. This information is then evaluated, and only then is the research question formulated. Subsequently, a draft is to be written, before it is corrected, edited, and finally the manuscript is written, together with academic references. While many of these steps are rather intuitive, they are not set in stone. For example, while writing the manuscript, it is likely that you will go back to the research question, refine it further, or even go even further back into literature research, seek and find further research, and this in turn will lead to further refinement of the research question. In the other illustration, this aspect is rather taken into account. Here, the individual steps are not shown rigidly, but independent of the previous and subsequent steps. This leads us to a first insight. There is no standardized research process. The individual steps of the research process depend on the research context and the research question. And importantly, they are not rigid, but rather interdependent. They may well repeat themselves, as we have seen in the example with the research question. It makes perfect sense to keep coming back to the research question and, depending on the manuscript and the literature, refine the research question further. Let us now take a closer look at the steps of the research process. One can distinguish between 7 different steps of the research process. One of these steps, which typically takes place at the beginning of a research project, is the literature research. The literature research involves the critical examination and review of the academic literature on a particular phenomenon. Only by knowing this literature can one later ask a precise research question that encompasses a circumstance that has not already been researched. A second step of the research process consists of concept and theory. As discussed in the first video, theories are essential to explain and predict human behavior. Theories can often be used to form conceptual models, which, for example, establish a causal relationship between individual variables or constructs. A third step is the research question, which often reflects and formulates the actual goal of a research project. The research question must be formulated precisely and can also include various sub-questions. A further step is the selection of the examination unit. Depending on the research question, the literature, but also the availability of participants, the examination unit is determined. This means that in this step the sample is defined, with the help of which the research question is to be answered. One step that goes hand in hand with this is data collection. In this step, the researcher considers which methodological approach should be chosen, for example, a qualitative or a quantitative one, in order to answer the research question accurately. Data collection is followed by data analysis. In this step, the collected data is processed and analyzed. This is also where the interpretation is carried out, which allows to answer the original research question. A final step is writing the manuscript. Here, the empirical results are processed and put into context of the academic literature. As soon as the manuscript is finished, it is submitted to an academic journal and ideally published there. Now you have a rough overview of the research process and its 7 steps. As you will see, the course Marketing Science is structured according to the research process. This means that over the next few weeks, we will have ample opportunity to discuss these individual steps in more detail.